Good morning. Today is Wednesday, January 20th, 2021. There are many subjects to study in Torah. Some of the subjects are more practically relevant than others. Studying the mitzvos, studying the mitzvos that we fulfill. The laws of Shabbos, the laws of keeping kosher. In our parsha, the laws of Pesach, how to observe Pesach. How to be a good person, what personality qualities to have, how to have positive relationships. There are other subjects in the Torah that practically are not applicable to us. For example, if we live outside of Israel, those mitzvos that are dependent on being inside of Israel, right now they're not practically applicable to us. Perhaps one day in the future they will be. As long as the Beis HaMikdash is not standing and in operation, all of the laws that apply to the Beis HaMikdash and the sacrifices and ritual purity do not practically apply to us. The Mishnah, which is the great collection of rabbinic writing, is divided into 6 sections. 3 of them are practically relevant today. 3 of them are practically not applicable to us today. So I'm not talking about amounts per se, but just in terms of structure, half of the Mishnah is subjects that are not practically relevant. So it's understandable that people usually concentrate on the areas that are practically relevant. But I want to share with you the 3 important reasons to study those areas of Torah that are not practically applicable. Number 1, as our rabbis in the Talmud say often, Shema Yibana Beis HaMikdash. One day the temple will be rebuilt, hopefully very soon, speedily in our days. Now on that day, we're going to need some Kohanim, we're going to need some Leviim, we're going to need some officiating and some ceremonies. We got to know what to do. There's going to be a moment we have to step in and know what to do. So we need to study this material so that on the day that it is applicable, we're up to speed. There's an amazing insight by the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Karelitz, who was the great halachic authority, one of the great halachic authorities in the early days of the state of Israel, in late 40s and 50s. And of course, he was born and trained as a rabbi in Europe. And then at a certain time, he moved to Israel. And he became one of the world's authorities on, for example, the agricultural laws. For example, the laws of Shemitah, the sabbatical year. By the way, this Rosh Hashanah begins another Shemitah year, another sabbatical year. We'll talk about that. But in order to apply those laws in Israel, even today, an extensive knowledge of agriculture is necessary. You have to know about different plants and different trees and how they work and how to take care of them. I mean, you should be able to imagine a yeshiva bachar in Lithuania probably does not have so much to do with, what's considered proper weeding and fertilizing, and but the subjects are in the Talmud, and he studied them. And he is one example. When he came to Israel, he was very quickly called upon to be able to put it to actual practical application. And he once wrote, he said, when I was learning in yeshiva in Europe, never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I would actually have to apply this stuff in real life. I was learning it. Okay, so the Chazon Ish learning it is not like me learning it. He learned it to the extent that he could actually put it into practice. But that is going to happen. That does happen. So that's number 1. Number 2, even those areas of Torah that are not practically applicable to me, they reflect God's will. The Torah is not only our collection of mitzvos and instructions that are relevant to us. The Torah is God's communication with mankind. So the clearest way, the most direct way we have to understanding God, who is after all unknowable in God's essence, the clearest way we have to understand is by looking at what he has given to us, by looking at the Torah, by studying the Torah. And so therefore, even if I'm studying something that is not practically applicable to me, practically relevant to me, but it is something that reflects what God wants, what God told me. And so therefore, as part of knowing God, it is extremely important. The third reason is because, in fact, all Torah is interrelated. All Torah is given by one author, by God, and there is a conceptual consistency from one subject to another, of all subjects. Our rabbis in the Talmud express it as follows: Divrei Torah, aniyim b'makom echad, va'ashirim b'makom acher. The words of Torah, any specific subject, are impoverished when we look at them in just one location, but they become enriched when we consider that subject in light of all the other subjects. In fact, our rabbis riff on the term Talmud bavli. So we understand Talmud bavli means the Talmud, the Gemara, bavli from Bavel, because the Talmud bavli, which is the main Talmud that we study, is mostly the deliberations of the scholars living in Bavel. Bavli means coming from Bavel. Our rabbis metaphorically understand bavli from the word bilbul, which means mixed together, like Migdal Bavel, something that is mixed together, because the subjects in the Talmud are not distinct from each other. Within the tractate on Shabbos, there are laws of kosher, there are laws of sacrifices, there are laws of ritual purity, etc., etc., etc. Everything is mixed together because you can only understand one subject if you also understand every other subject. Now, that's quite demanding, because what that means is you can never fully understand any single subject until you have learned the entire Torah, which that takes some work. So to start the first page of the first tractate of Talmud assumes you've already been through the whole thing once and you know basically what it's talking about. Now let's talk about what time do we say Shema in the evening. That's the beginning of Brachos, the first tractate. But it's also rewarding because every subject that we study sheds light on every other subject. And every topic that we study, even if it is not something that is practically relevant to us, contains lessons and concepts that are practically relevant in other areas. Everything is interrelated. So let me share with you an example, a famous example from our parsha. In Jewish law, like in civil law, there is a concept known as agency. I can appoint an agent to act on my behalf. It's like in civil law, power of attorney. So I appoint a person and their action is my action. Their signature is my signature. Their word is my word. It's called agency, or we refer to it in our society as having power of attorney. In the Talmud's phrase, the Talmud phrases it, Shlucho Shalom Kamoso. The agent of a person is like that person. I appoint an agent to go enter into contract on my behalf. That person is acting on my behalf. So that person's signature is my signature, etc. And that applies in many areas of law. What is the source of that concept in Jewish law? You may find it surprising. It's in our parsha. So the Torah tells us that when the Jewish people were about to leave Egypt, on the afternoon before the Exodus, God had commanded them a couple of days before, they were to take an animal that was going to be the Karban Pesach, the Paschal offering. And they were to shech that animal, to slaughter the animal, and they roasted it over an open fire. And that was the meal that they ate as the Seder. And remember, and this is just so fascinating, the first Seder occurred the night before they left Egypt. It occurred while they were still slaves. Just think about that for a moment. That first Seder, they are eating the meal of freedom while they are still slaves. Okay. Then in our Parsha, the Torah gives us the rules of the Karban Pesach every year, once the Mishkan is built, and then finally the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. Every year, on the afternoon before Pesach, the Karban Pesach, the animals would be slaughtered in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, and each group would take the animal home. They would roast it over an open fire, and that would be the centerpiece of the meal for the Seder, for the Pesach Seder. The Torah also tells us that it was required for the Seder, people would gather into groups, because you have an animal, let's say a sheep, a lamb, let's say, and it feeds a lot of people. So you gather a group. Maybe there be 20 people, 30 people, maybe there be 40 people in a group. And the group would be together and they would share this meat for the meal. And that was part of the Seder. The Torah says in our Parsha, V'shachatu oso kol kahal adas Yisrael bein horabayim. The entire Jewish people would slaughter this animal in the afternoon before Pesach, the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. They would slaughter the animal, they would bring it home, they would roast it. That night they would have it as part of the Seder. The Talmud teaches us that in fact what happened is every group would select one agent, one shliach, because it would be impossible for every single Jewish person to come to the Beis HaMikdash. As it was, they had to do it in 3 shifts. It would have been impossible for everybody to come. There would be no room. There would be no capacity for such a thing. And it had to be done, the shchita, the slaughtering had to be done in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. So every group of whatever it was, 20, 30, 40, would appoint one shliach. And that one shliach would go on behalf of the entire group with the animal, and he would oversee the shechting of the animal, and he would bring it back, and everyone would share it that night. But even though it's only one person acting as an agent on behalf of the group, the words of the Torah are, V'shachatu oso kol kahal adas Yisrael. Every single individual was required to do this. What you see from the Torah, says the Gemara, that when we appoint an agent, and an agent acts on my behalf, it is accredited as if every single individual did that action. Mikan, from here the Talmud says, Shlucho Shalom Kamoso, that an agent is like the actions of every single one that sent him or her. And that applies in every area of life, in ritual areas, in legal areas, and this is the source. So you have a subject which, Karban Pesach, we do not have a Karban Pesach today. It's not practically applicable to us. And yet studying the laws of Karban Pesach revealed to us a legal concept that every single one of us uses in our daily lives, in business, in other areas. For example, when we arrange to sell chametz before Pesach. So we go to the rabbi. In our community, we go to Rabbi Alex. What are we going to Rabbi Alex for? Keep in mind, I've said this before, you're not selling your chametz to Rabbi Alex. Rabbi Alex does not want your chametz. He's trying to get rid of chametz before Pesach, just like you want to get rid of chametz before Pesach. You are appointing him as your agent, your shliach. He will represent you when we sell the chametz to the non-Jewish person. He is your agent. He is acting on your behalf. And the reason that's important is because it is not practical for every individual to sell it to a non-Jew for Pesach, because the way that we do the sale is quite complicated, extremely complicated. So all of us are better off leaving it to an expert, and therefore we appoint an agent to do it for us. That's one example. Another example, much less pleasant subject to discuss, a person can appoint an agent to deliver or receive a get, a bill of divorce. If a couple is divorcing, this piece of paper that is called the get, this document, must be delivered from the hand of the man to the hand of the woman. Either one of them could appoint an agent to act on their behalf. Let's say the two are in different locations and can't come into one place. Or let's say, just for relationship reasons, it's not feasible for the two of them to be in one room at the same time. So either of them could appoint an agent, and the hand of the agent is like the hand of the one that appointed the agent. However, even though that is certainly true, that is the law, and it comes from this pasuk, whenever possible, it is preferable to do an action yourself. Our rabbis in the Talmud say, mitzvah bo yoser mibishlucho. It's still a better mitzvah to do it yourself. For example, it is also possible to get married through an agent. So the act of marriage requires the man giving an object of value, such as a ring, to the woman. Either one could appoint an agent to act on their behalf. The man could appoint an agent to give the ring. The woman could appoint an agent to receive the ring. And the hand of the agent would be like the hand of the one that appointed them. But I do not suggest, under normal circumstances, appointing an agent for that purpose. It's better to do it yourself. That's an example where it's better to do it yourself. But what you do see from this whole subject is that the Torah forms a single, integrated, unified system, reflecting the will of a single, integrated, unified God. And that's why it's so important that from our parsha, from a subject that is not practically applicable, we can derive lessons that are applicable in our daily lives. And this is one of hundreds, perhaps thousands of examples. My friends, I wish you all a great day, and I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.